Robinson Crusoe, Chapter 16. He rears a flock of goats. His diary. His domestic habits and style of living. Increasing prosperity. But being now in the 11th year of my residence, and, as I have said, my ammunition growing low, I set myself to study some art to trap and snare the goats, to see whether I could not catch some of them alive. And particularly, I wanted a she-goat great with young. To this purpose, I made snares to hamper them, and I do believe they were more than once taken in them. But my tackle was not good, for I had no wire, and I always found them broken and my bait devoured. At length I resolved to try a pitfall, so I dug several large pits in the earth in places where I had observed the goats used to feed, and over these pits I placed hurdles, of my own making, too, with a great weight upon them. And several times I put ears of barley and dry rice without setting the trap, and I could easily perceive that the goats had gone in and eaten up the corn, for I could see the mark of their feet. At length I set 3 traps in one night, and going the next morning, I found them all standing, and yet the bait eaten and gone. This was very discouraging. However, I altered my trap, and not to trouble you with particulars, going one morning to see my trap, I found in one of them a large old he-goat, and in one of the others 3 kids, a male and 2 females. As to the old one, I knew not what to do with him. He was so fierce I durst not go into the pit to him, that is to say, to go about to bring him away alive, which was what I wanted. I could have killed him, but that was not my business, nor would it answer my end. So I even let him out, and he ran away, as if he had been frightened out of his wits. But I'd forgotten then what I'd learned afterwards, that hunger will tame a lion. If I'd let him stay there 3 or 4 days without food, and then have carried him some water to drink, and then a little corn, he would have been as tame as one of the kids, for they are mighty sagacious, tractable creatures, where they are well used. However, for the present, I let him go, knowing no better at that time. Then I went to the 3 kids, and taking them one by one, I tied them with strings together, and with some difficulty brought them all home. It was a good while before they would feed, but throwing them some sweet corn, it tempted them, and they began to be tame. And now I found that if I expected to supply myself with goat flesh when I had no powder or shot left, breeding some up tame was my only way, when perhaps I might have them about my house like a flock of sheep. But then it presently occurred to me that I must keep the tame from the wild, or else they would always run wild when they grew up. And the only way for this was to have some enclosed piece of ground, well fenced either with hedge or pale, to keep them in so effectually that those within might not break out, or those without break in. This was a great undertaking for one pair of hands, yet as I saw there was an absolute necessity of doing it, my first piece of work was to find out a piece of ground, viz., where there was likely to be herbage for them to eat, water for them to drink, and cover to keep them from the sun. Those who understand such enclosures will think I had very little contrivance when I pitched upon a place very proper for all these, being a plain open piece of meadowland, or savanna, as our people call it in the western colonies, which had 2 or 3 little drills of fresh water in it, and at one end was very woody. I say they will smile at my forecasts when I shall tell them I began my enclosing of this piece of ground in such a manner that my hedge or pale must have been at least 2 miles about. Nor was the madness of it so great as to compass, for if it was 10 miles about, I was like to have time enough to do it in. But I did not consider that my goats would be as wild in so much compass as if they had had the whole island, and I should have so much room to chase them in that I should never catch them. My hedge was begun and carried on, I believe, about 50 yards when this thought occurred to me. So I presently stopped short, and for the first beginning I resolved to enclose a piece of about 150 yards in length and 100 yards in breadth, which, as it would maintain as many as I should have in any reasonable time, so as my flock increased, I could add more ground to my enclosure. This was acting with some prudence, and I went to work with courage. I was about 3 months hedging in the first piece, and, till I had it done, I tethered the 3 kids in the best part of it, and used them to feed as near me as possible to make them familiar. And very often I would go and carry them some ears of barley or a handful of rice, and feed them out of my hand, so that after my enclosure was finished and I let them loose, they would follow me up and down, bleating after me for a handful of corn. This answered my end, and in about a year and a half I had a flock of about 12 goats, kids and all, and in 2 years I had 43, besides several that I took and killed for my food. And after that I enclosed 5 several pieces of ground to feed them in, with little pens to drive them into to take them as I wanted, and gates out of one piece of ground into another. But this was not all, for now I not only had goat's flesh to feed on when I pleased, but milk too, a thing which indeed in my beginning I did not so much as think of, and which, when it came into my thoughts, was really an agreeable surprise. For now I set up my dairy and had sometimes a gallon or 2 of milk in a day, and as nature, who gives supplies of food to every creature, dictates even naturally how to make use of it, so I, that had never milked a cow, much less a goat, or seen butter or cheese made, very readily and handily, though after a great many essays and miscarriages, made me both butter and cheese at last, and never wanted it afterwards. How merciful can our great Creator treat his creatures, even in those conditions in which they seem to be overwhelmed in destruction. How can he sweeten the bitterest providences and give us cause to praise him for dungeons and prisons? What a table was here spread for me in a wilderness, where I saw nothing at first but to perish from hunger. It would have made a Stoic smile to have seen me and my little family sit down to dinner. There was my majesty, the prince and lord of the whole island. I had the lives of all my subjects at my absolute command. I could hang, draw, give a liberty, and take it away, and no rebels among all my subjects. Then to see how like a king I dined too, all alone, attended by my servants. Paul, as if he had been my favorite, was the only person permitted to talk to me. My dog, who was now grown very old and crazy, and had found no species to multiply his kind upon, sat always at my right hand, and 2 cats, one on one side of the table and one on the other, expecting now and then a bit from my hand as a mark of special favor. But these were not the 2 cats which I had brought on shore at first, for they were both of them dead, and had been interred near my habitation by my own hand. But one of them having multiplied by I know not what kind of creature, these were 2 which I had preserved tame, whereas the rest ran wild in the woods, and became indeed troublesome to me at last. For they would often come into my house and plunder me too, till at last I was obliged to shoot them, and did kill a great many. At length they left me. With this attendance, and in this plentiful manner, I lived. Neither could I be said to want anything but society, and of that, in some time after this, I was like to have too much. I was something impatient, as I have observed, to have the use of my boat, though very loath to run away more hazards, and therefore sometimes I sat contriving ways to get her about the island, and at other times I sat myself down contented enough without her. But I had a strange uneasiness in my mind to go down to the point of the island, where, as I have said in my last ramble, I went up the hill to see how the shore lay, and how the current set, that I might see what I had to do. This inclination increased upon me every day, and at length I resolved to travel thither by land, following the edge of the shore. I did so, but had anyone in England been to meet such a man as I was, it must either have frightened them or raised a great deal of laughter. And as I frequently stood still to look at myself, I could not but smile at the notion of my traveling through Yorkshire with such an equipage and in such a dress. But please to take a sketch of my figure as follows. I had a great high shapeless cap, made of goatskin, with a flap hanging down behind, as well to keep the sun from me as to shoot the rain off from running into my neck, nothing being so hurtful in these climes as the rain upon the flesh under the clothes. And we'll pause here and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.